Sometimes we forget why we're here. It's easy to fall off track. These help us remember.
These battle scars don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battles.
Growing up I had a dream, something no one else could see. Tell me what it means when your faith is falling beneath your knees and you can't breathe. Everything you see reminds you of what you're not or something you won't be. You gotta take what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we fixed it. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in a business. Not because they wanna do it, just because they heard it pays. And who the fuck wants to be poor knowing that's how we've been raised? Society is getting heavy, I can feel the weight. The pressure of success is like 100 million pounds of shame. And that's the reason I'm staying up late, trying to find a way to escape the stereotypes this day and age is making me feel like the only way I'll be happy is getting signed to a label and making money through rapping. I wanna share my emotion because this world is attacking the very principle of life that lets the people be happy. If you don't have a reason to breathe, why even live? These battle scars are impressions of everything that it is.
Scars don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battle scars don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battles.
Now, if I had a voice that reached 100 million people, I'd tell them there's a reason that we're all created equal. Cause some decide to be great and some decide a sequel to an average person's life is simply what they want to be. So you make your decision, all I know is what I'm given. Won't define the life I lead or the way I dwell in existence. I've seen a greater image on the walls of where I'm living, and the words twisted and scripted remind me of something written. Faith is a gift that is given down to the people. If one believes it, one receives it. It's given if it is needed. Don't ever think you're trapped in a life that you never wanted. Your options are infinite, that's some mathematical logic. I'm not saying I'm a prophet, I'm speaking for what it's worth. These lyrics define my prayers and these battle scars on my church. Not saying I'm a prophet, I'm speaking for what it's worth. These lyrics define my prayers, these battle scars on my church.
Scars don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battle scars don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battles.
Well, hello everyone. How are you doing? And hello CJ, long time no see. We're going to get somewhat right into this, but I need to do my YouTube stuff first because, you know, mama needs lettuce for the shoe fetish. But first of all, if you are new or just a stubborn libertarian and have not yet subscribed to the channel, I really would appreciate it if you could just hit that subscribe button and perhaps give a like and a share. It would be greatly appreciated. You can also follow me on X Twitter, CARYN, and Harlos. I would appreciate that as well. My Twitter has been fire for a while because it's still pretty much the Wild West there, and I love it. And last but not least, I would truly appreciate your support on patreon.com/Pink Flame of Liberty. It really does help to support this channel if you like this kind of content, which has been pretty much a mixture between LP stuff and more of this general commentary. All right, as I have in the past few shows, I've got notes. And yes, it is written in pink. But let me do a bit of a setup here at first, and something I need to get out right in front, because this is going to be a very critical video, but it's critical of the comments that are given by this particular other creator, Mason, and I did put a link to this live stream over in his comments, so he knew I was going to do it. I will put it in the show notes. I haven't been really good about that, but particularly with the smaller creators, not the Matt Walshes of the world. I think it's important to put that information in the show notes, and I will definitely do that. But what I want to get ahead of is, while I'm going to disagree with a lot of his comments, I don't disagree with his conclusion. And that is that Christian nationalism is horrible. Like he said, dangerous. It's not just dangerous, it's frickin' horrible. And perhaps that's why I'm so critical of his comments, because good arguments supported, good conclusions supported by bad arguments aren't going to convince people, because the minute they get into, well, it might convince them, but the minute they get into a debate with someone of the opposing view that's just the slightest bit knowledgeable, they're going to be readily dismantled. And it's going to harden people who hold these very mistaken views when they hear bad critiques to think there are no good critiques. And also, I am coming at it from a bit of a different perspective. Mason is a Marxist, so I think you all know my opinion on Marxism. I think Mason seems like a very personable, funny guy with a crap ideology. So obviously not coming at it from a Marxist perspective, so I thought that was also important. And I have to say, first, when I watched this video, I was a big sourpuss. I took him way too seriously. There certainly are serious comments, and that's what I'm going to be dealing with. But if you end up going to his channel and looking at the link, there is a lot of jokes interspersed. And I was taking the jokes way too seriously, and I was being all sourpuss in the comments. And he's like, "You're new here, right?" Because that's just his style. So not going to pick on interspersing the humor. I do that as well. Some people might think my humor is bad or goofy or detracts from the points. I do it to entertain myself. So I am only dealing with his more serious comments. His video is rather short. It's about 12 minutes, and I've done little short clips because I do want to start dealing with Christian nationalist content. Not that his is a critique, but I mean with the topic in general. And I figured this was a good way to start. And I am going to be referring to my notes a lot to make sure I don't miss anything. But something I've noted, you'll find some really good critiques of Christian nationalism from a perspective that libertarians will find more convincing on James Lindsay's channel. So it's Conceptual James on X Twitter. But what really struck me, because I listened to about 4 hours of his content today, I've gotten a lot more seeped in the ideology of what exactly Christian nationalism entails. As I was preparing to do this video, I downloaded Stephen Wolf's book, The Case for Christian Nationalism. Can't say I listened to the whole thing, but I listened to enough on Audible to have a good grasp of it, and I am going to listen to the whole thing. So did a lot of research for this, and still probably just touched the surface. I would really recommend James Lindsay's hours that he has on this. The one that I found the best is titled WTF is Christian Nationalism. I think it came out about a month ago. It's 2 hours long, I think. Excellent. Very excellent. Now, James would disagree with a lot of my conclusions, not on Christian nationalism, on my particular libertarian point of view. He's definitely coming from a classical liberal background. And listening to him will really highlight the difference between like a libertarian anarchist, or what I would just consider a thoroughgoing libertarian, and a classical liberal. I am going to actually do some, not critiques, but commentary on his comments on classical liberalism to point out those differences. I have some timestamps here that I'm going to deal with in a future video. But one thing I've really noted about Christian nationalism. And what got me more interested in it is I had a libertarian friend who wrote some really great Christian libertarian content. And I was looking for it a few months ago because I wanted to link somebody to it. He had a great article on the difference between government and the state. And I was like, his site's gone. I need to go look it up on the Wayback Machine to get these great articles. So then, like a few days later, I happened to see his name mentioned on Twitter, like calling him a white nationalist. And I was like, what? There's no way. And it's CJ Ingalls, by the way. And I don't believe he's a white nationalist. Let me just get that out there. I'm not going to libel this person. But CJ Ingalls was a great libertarian writer. Then I went to look him up on Twitter, and he's just hardcore anti-libertarian now, hardcore Christian nationalist. And it was so sad to see. But what it really opened my eyes to after listening to James Lindsay and doing my research, a lot of these Christian nationalists are a subset of the post-libertarian movement. A lot of them used to be libertarians. And to turn to one of the most pernicious and disgusting forms of authoritarianism is just super, super sad to me. But there's a heavy post-libertarian strand running through there. Ooh, need to get, excuse me. And yes, it is my Libertarian cup from the Libertarian Party of Louisiana convention. So, excuse me, we're going to get into his critique, but let me just tell you a little something that's the Christian nationalists have in common. The movement tends to be reformed. If you're a Christian, that terminology will mean something to you. To the non-Christians, or Calvinist, heavily Calvinist and Protestant. Though in other countries, there has been very Catholic, when it called Christian, I forgot what they, integrationist, I think is what they call themselves. So an integration of the state and the church. But the movement we're talking about now is pretty much Protestant. But so funny, because James Lindsay really pointed out with their conception of the Christian prince how it sounds so much like the frickin' Pope. But okay, you go, your Protestant, post-libertarian, Christian nationalist self. Now, with that long intro, let's get into Mason's commentary. And let's, they're going to be really, really short clips, and I'm going to do my comments afterwards. Here's the first clip.
There even seems to be a recent rise of Christian nationalism. There are new books even explicitly promoting Christian nationalism. And conservative politicians who once were more subtle about expressing Christian nationalism are much more explicit about it.
I think I'm probably going to need to stick my mic on mute when that's going. You probably heard an echo on it, but you can see he has a quote up here from Marjorie Taylor Greene. No, and he also put up a screenshot of Stephen Wolfe's book, which is like the seminal book right now, Christian nationalism. It was the case for Christian nationalism. But he doesn't really interact with the breadth of Christian nationalism. James Lindsay really pointed this out, where a lot of the proponents of this ideology have mastered the Mott and Bailey technique, where you'll have some soft-core Christian nationalists that will posit positions that are a lot more easily defendable. It's funny enough, the one that does that is another author named Wolfe, but not any relation to Stephen Wolfe. And one thing I forgot to say in my intro, I obviously don't mean Mason any ill will. And it's so funny that he's harping on Christian nationalism as dangerous. I think Marxism is actually just as dangerous. And in some ways, more so, by the way. And you want to know what? I'm going to come back to this clip because there's something I forgot to say in the intro. Yeah, I'm always a bit scattered like this, Mason, if you're watching. Mason's going to buy into this, but again, he's a Marxist. To me and to James Lindsay, this is such an obvious psyop. When you see the way the leftist state tries to paint everything as having white nationalist or Christian nationalist ties. Now, I do think someone like C.J. Engels, Stephen Wolfe, they're probably very genuine, but I bet you that movement is lousy with feds. Like, absolutely lousy with feds that are just setting them up. And one day, there is going to be an activating event that is going to be used as an excuse for government to crack down on religious freedom, enact all kinds of draconian laws and restrictions on speech. Like, you should be able to see this a mile away. And it's useful fools that are buying into this and playing right into the hands of feds. So let's go back to this first clip because I had forgotten to say that, and I think that's really important to get right up front.
There even seems to be a recent rise of Christian nationalism. There are new books even explicitly promoting Christian nationalism. And conservative politicians who once were more subtle about expressing Christian nationalism are much more explicit about it.
Okay. So Marjorie Taylor Greene's just a dumbass, and she doubled down on this. When I first saw this quote, I'm like, she just said something dumb, didn't mean anything by it, but she's doubled down on it. Just because people, and Lauren Boebert has actually made comments that are very similar to this as well. So just because dumbasses like this are capitalizing on what they see as some kind of zeitgeist doesn't mean Christian nationalism is on the rise. I do think, well, I'm going to agree it's on the rise, but it's not on the rise in some major way, the way the leftist hysterical media will have you believe. But it could. It certainly is dangerous, and it certainly, and I don't make this comparison lightly because I think most of the time when these comparisons are made, they're just idiotic. But with Christian nationalism, if you listen to these guys enough, the comparison to The Handmaid's Tale is not an exaggeration. Like, we'll get into some of that. It is crazy. So the book he showed on the screen, again, I've downloaded it. I've listened to a good bit of it. I've listened to some Christian critiques of it. I listened to that secular critique from James Lindsay. And as I said, he doesn't show any understanding of the variations. For instance, you'll have someone like Doug Wilson of Moscow, Idaho, a big theonomist, but what he advocates for is different than what Stephen Wolfe advocates for. And the James Lindsay interview dealt with somebody named Charles Haywood, who is Fruit Loop Looney Tune. That would have been something interesting to interact with. I've noticed, as did James Lindsay, that these guys are just super assholes online. If this is their Christian witness, they're utterly failing. Now, I don't really know exactly what Marjorie Taylor Greene meant by this quote. I think she's probably just shooting off her mouth. But I think she meant it more that she's a nationalist who's a Christian. And a nationalist who's a Christian is not necessarily a Christian nationalist. If she were a Christian nationalist, though again, we're getting into shades of Handmaid's Tale, she should not be in this position. Because Christian nationalists believe in very, very strict, you shall not get out of the box gender roles. She has no business being in a position of political leadership if she was actually a Christian nationalist, unless she's going to be like Serena Joy in The Handmaid's Tale, who wrote the book to oppress women, and then eventually when her, theocracy came about, she was forbidden from reading the very book she wrote. Now, maybe that's a Marjorie Taylor Greene, but I don't believe she is actually a Christian nationalist in the way the proponents say. She's just a nationalist who happens to be a Christian, and that is two totally different things. Even though she doubled down on this, she's just not particularly smart. Same thing with Lauren Boebert, who has been making, again, similarly statements. But something to be concerned about, because it is very, at least culturally, Christian, and I'm not saying this to be inflammatory. You know, I don't say things like what I'm going to say next lightly. In examining and getting deeper down the rabbit hole of Christian nationalism, it's fascistic. And I don't mean it in the way the left means it. I mean it in the culturally fascistic way the actual fascists were, where they're very much about, you know, at least in Germany, it was the fatherland and the society and the community and the virtue and the blood and soil and the band of sticks, you know, that's the fascies. The fascist overtones are so freaking obvious that I'd even say it. And I don't call very many people fascistic. There's some in the far left, but this is the reactionary movement to the far left. So it's not surprising that they are also fascistic, like virtue and vitality. It gets really, really crazy. Next clip.
However, Christian nationalism isn't new by any means. It has a long history in America.
Speaking of being inflammatory, to say Christian nationalism has a long history and then putting up the Klan, dude, are you frickin' serious? I'm not going to argue about what the Klan's beliefs are. I will agree with you that Christian nationalism has a long history in this country. Back to the founding, which you're going to deny. The long history isn't the Klan. It goes right back to the founding of this country, though what today's Christian nationalists want is way stricter, but it certainly has roots in the founding of this country. But you really ought to be ashamed of yourself with this picture. You really should. You know, trying to Klan is just poisoning the well and is red meat for your supporters. You didn't give any, like, evidence of this, like I did when I was going to use the fascism word. I gave some examples of the cultural fascism that I think is going on. It's certainly, as I said, tied to cultural fascism and inevitably leads to xenophobia. I will give them that. But to criticize it so ham-handedly is just giving the proponents of it a reason to brush you off. And I would hope we want to reach people who might be tempted by this, not just elicit like an overly emotional reaction.
All right, so before talking about why Christian nationalism is so dangerous, we probably should talk about what Christian nationalism even is. It essentially boils down to Christianity-affiliated nationalism. That seems very obvious. So what then is nationalism? It is the promotion of one group's interests in a particular nation. So for American Christian nationalism, it is the promotion of specific Christians' interests in America.
Yes and no. That's not a good definition, but it's also not a bad definition. You know that weird way things can be, like not bad, but not good. And thank you so much, Dave Davis, for the super chat. I do want to stick this up there. He said, by the way, the KKK was anti-Catholic. Very much so. But I would say today's Christian nationalists, depending on which one you talk to, might be anti-Catholic. If you're dealing with Doug Wilson's, and his book is called Mere Christendom, to try to riff off of Mere Christianity, he would broadly include Catholics in his description, because he believes in mere Christendom. The only article of faith that would need to be agreed to is the Apostles' Creed. And Protestants and Catholics believe in the Apostles' Creed. Some Christian nationalists are much thicker than that, to use libertarian terms, where they would say, no, you have to have a right understanding of the gospel, that you're saved by faith alone, through grace alone. It depends on the Christian nationalists that you're talking to. They're not monolithic. The way that Stephen Wolfe describes Christian nationalism, if I can find the quote, I had some notes. I'll just do it by memory. Oh, a Christian nation that is self-consciously acting for its own temporal and spiritual good. So, again, his definition wasn't wrong, but I think it was really incomplete. And that's the definition I think all Christian nationalists would agree with, though some would import more into that. Because then you start getting into, when you start dealing with the Christian Prince of Stephen Wolfe, a form of sacralism. And sacralism was a frickin' disaster. And what sacralism is? Sacralism is like the church can exercise the magisterial, civil magisterial functions. Whereas some modern Christian nationalists or people that are sympathetic to that view would say that the church is to teach the civil magistrate, but not exercise the authority of the civil magistrate. Sacralism led to I don't know how widespread, I don't want to exaggerate, led to martyring of, say, the Anabaptists. And Stephen Wolfe is not particularly fond, if I remember correctly, or I might be importing views of Charles Haywood. I think the Anabaptists would be in trouble. And there's some modern Baptists that are very concerned about this as well, because sacralism did not end well for a lot of Baptists during the Middle Ages. Sacralism plus Christian nationalism is actually even more dangerous, I think, than non-sacral Christian nationalism. Mason says, well, Christian nationalism is just advocating for the good and views of specific Christians, but he goes on to do the same thing. What's so funny is that I don't think, in some of his critique, Mason's problem isn't the mixing of politics and Christianity. It's the mixing of politics and a view of Christianity he doesn't agree with. And he'd be fine with it if it was Christian liberation theology, which he holds to, which is a neo-Marxist synthesis of Christianity and Marxism, which I think is just as dangerous, by the way. Okay, I think actually there was part 2 to this clip. Let me play it and make sure I didn't miss anything.
That caveat of specific Christians is important, as I'll talk about later.
Yeah, I dealt with that with the specific Christians. Okay, next one.
So with that definition, what is it that Christian nationalists want and believe? American Christian nationalists want to take back America for God. They believe America was founded as a Christian nation, even though many of the founding fathers were deists, not Christians. And one even tore out the pages in the Bible where Jesus did miracles. And I'm sure Christian nationalists are famous for not literally believing the miracles Jesus did.
Okay, Jan. This is where Mason starts to go absolutely haywire. I know people are not going to like me saying this, but America was founded as a Christian nation. There were blasphemy laws on the books and all of the colonies, and none of them thought that was opposed to the Constitution. If you're going to have blasphemy laws that are specifically geared towards defaming the name of Jesus Christ, you are a Christian nation. That is exactly what Christian nationalists want today. That's why Charles Haywood calls their view the future past. It's as James Lindsay pointed out, it's oddly enough a form of far-right postmodernism that wants to absolutely break apart or smash into pieces the current paradigm in order to reassemble it in their own image. But to deny that we were founded as a Christian nation is just smooth-brained. It is so smooth-brained. We absolutely were. The fact that some founding fathers were not Christians or were deists/Christians doesn't matter. It wasn't a country founded for them. It was a country founded for the majority of people. They were founding fathers, not creating a nation in their own image. And the majority of people were Christian, or at least culturally Christian. The frickin' Mayflower started this whole chain of events. It just because who was the founding father that he said tore the pages where Jesus worked miracles out of the Bible? And no, he didn't. Yes, he excised those parts, but it was a careful cut and like glue on other pages. Now, what difference does it make? It makes a big difference. Imagine visualizing somebody just tearing pages out of a book that's quite irreverent. But he was actually reverent to the book, and he wanted to excise the errors that he thought he saw in there. Now, to most Orthodox Christians, that would, well, to all Orthodox Christians, that would be considered a heretical view. But in such as the Mere Christendom of Doug Wilson, that would not make him not a cultural Christian. This continually pointing, well, there were deists. Yeah. And there were also Muslims in early America. There were also Hindus in early America. But the vast majority of them were Christian. This was a Christian nation. That doesn't mean everybody was Christian. But the laws were founded on Christian values. Blasphemy laws, for God's sakes, that were upheld by state Supreme Courts. Oh, Mamma Mia. Next clip.
The power of American Christian nationalism manifests in many ways, but one notable way is that 90% of Congress is Christian. Certainly not all Christians in Congress are Christian nationalists, but in a nation where only 65% of people are Christian, this disproportionate representation of Christians is indicative of how much Christian nationalism influences America's most powerful leaders.
I hope you saw like the complete illogic of everything he said. First of all, he said 90% are Christians, but they're not Christian nationalists. But because they're Christians, that shows the inordinate influence of Christian nationalists, even though they're not all Christian nationalists, not by far. That made no sense. That was just words. But to say also that 90% of, and that figure's not correct. When you have people who are claiming to be Christians, but then do some of the most anti-Christian things, okay, maybe they're culturally Christians, they at least claim they're Christians. Seriously doubt that 90% of Congress is committed Christians. But, you know, he's using that with the social statistics as well, where allegedly 65% of the country is Christian, and I don't think they're committed Christians either. But to take a bulk number of 65% and then import that over to the 90%, hopefully you could see you're not comparing apples to oranges. Are most of the smaller percentages of what you have to look at is what are the percentages in the various geographic regions that these people were elected to represent. If Christians were more than a majority, that's our electoral system, or forget even more than a majority, first past the post. That's the republic that we have. It's not a popular vote direct democracy where you can compare the entire percentage over the whole country to the entire percentage over all of Congress. That's not how our representative system works. You have to look at, are they representing the majority or at least the plurality in elections of the alleged views of the people in their geographical regions? And also, there could be other factors. So he's dealing with the big sample size of the whole country and then the smaller, extremely smaller sample size of Congress. Well, is there perhaps something in the Christian work ethic or Christian worldview that inspires people from that demographic to be more inclined to run for office? I don't know. But those are questions to be asked rather than just this verbal diarrhea. Next.
Because of this disproportionate representation of Christian nationalism in America's federal government, popular political policies for reproductive rights, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and rights for people of color are often not supported because a few small Christian nationalists have much more power than their size would indicate that they have.
And let's just take the easiest example here. What rights for people of color? Someone please explain to me how that's different from colored people. What rights for Black Americans are denied by Christian nationalists or any of the professed Christians, some of which are leftists, in the federal government? Like, that's just complete bullshit. And what you consider rights aren't actually rights. So I don't know what LGBT rights you are trying to insinuate here. You don't give much difference. If you're talking about children can't consent. But for adults, yeah, there are some adults that there are some Christians, such as Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, that want to restrict the rights of adults to do things that they disapprove of. That's not the people in Congress, or we'd start to see those laws. It's not 90% of the people in Congress. The abortion issue is much stickier. A lot of times there is, in fact, religious motivations for it, but I know plenty of secular pro-life people to just boil it down. And you got someone like Ben Shapiro. He's not a Christian, and he's as pro-life as they possibly can get. You can't narrow that issue down to that. And certainly the Supreme Court decision did not rely upon religion at all. It just said it's not the province of the federal government. I'm sure there are religious arguments made in various state legislatures. But to just say that this is a Christian nationalist thing is just dumb. And the funny thing is, in a country that had blasphemy laws in the early days of this country, in plenty of places there weren't any laws against abortion. Abortion's been a weird issue. And even like the sacral times, going back to the Middle Ages, and in some Jewish points of view and in some Christian points of view, abortion wasn't even considered to be wrong until quickening, which is when you could feel the baby, because, in more primitive medical times, most miscarriages happened before that time. So it was after you could feel the baby move. That's when they started to attach moral equivalence to it. Pro-lifers don't like to hear that, but the consistent testimony of the church over the span of millennia was not always categorically opposed to termination of pregnancy from the moment of conception on. They just weren't. Now, me personally, I happen to be pro-life, but don't want laws. But I'm also very honest about the Christian history of it and the history of some other religions with that particular point of view. You want to know what the government what the danger is? It's government. It's not people having personal views. It's that Chekhov's gun's on the table. And one side or another, because there's a million multi-sides like a diamond, is going to pick it up the minute they have power. That's not a problem with Christian nationalism. Your Marxist ass would do that. get the government gun off the table.
Many Christian nationalists believe in a dominion theology, where humans are to have dominion over all creation. Essentially, they believe that humans are to do with the natural world as they please because they have dominion over it.
Okay, now he's starting to get into things I know about. For those of you who don't know my background, before as a libertarian, like I have a background in very fundamentalist religion, and I obviously am not that any longer, but still very steeped in theology. I'd had discussions with authors, Christian authors, who could have sworn I was seminary trained. It's just my weaponized autism. For a while, that was my special interest, learning theology. I've self-authored a book that the last I had heard is still required reading at Liberty University. It's a commentary on Matthew 24. Can't say I agree 100% with everything I wrote in a past life, but the hermeneutics of it, I definitely agree with. So when you start talking about things like dominion theology, I know what that is, unlike your average listener. Dominion theology is pretty much, there might be like some slight differences, but it's pretty much synonymous with theonomy. And it does not mean that you can just do what you want with everything. That's not even what dominion theology about. Dominion theology is about the mixing of church and state. It's a political view. It's a religio-political view. Kind of like some fundamentalist Muslims view that there's no difference, no separation between church and state. Has nothing to do with using creation. He's getting that confused because the word dominion does appear in Genesis, where God said he made them in his image, and that they were to be given dominion over the birds and animals and every creeping thing over the face of the earth. Notice it doesn't say resources in that particular verse. But in Genesis as well, it also says of the physical earth. So that talked about the animals. And it wasn't to say that, it was to indicate that in the created order, man is superior to the animals. That is all that means. It also in Genesis, when speaking of creation, of speaking of the land and the plants and the earth, that man was put there to be a caretaker. So you're completely misrepresenting like that point of view over man allegedly having dominion over the earth, and then conflating it with dominion theology. Dominion theology is something completely different. How can I trust what you're saying about Christian nationalism when you don't understand or can correctly represent the very basics of what they believe? That's why I thought it was important for me to do this video, because I understand it and oppose it, rather than setting up straw men. So the verse is with the dealing with the dominion over other animals, creeping things, birds, whatever. That's Genesis 1:26 through 1:28. And then it says where God placed man in the Garden of Eden to be a caretaker of creation. That is Genesis 2:15. But this next thing is where he really goes off the rails. And let me just give some background to this. The book I wrote, again, is a commentary on Matthew 24. So where my area of specialty is eschatology, which is the study of end times or end times passages. Like, I know that subject. So he's going to get into this here, and this is so completely off the rails.
In addition to this belief, many Christian nationalists believe in some type of rapture theology, where the world will basically have to go to shit in order for Jesus to return.
Now, is there some screwy Christian nationalist that believes in rapture theory? Maybe, but no. Like, there might be a couple because they're just wackadoodle. Christian nationalists are mostly post-millennial. Rapture is a premillennial theology. I can't think of any Christian nationalists, but there might be some. Or if you're dealing with the more ignorant aspects that are just spouting this off, like Marjorie Taylor Greene. But the scholars of the movement, the leaders of this movement, they are post-millennial, actual dominion theology. They're not rapturous. They're not premillennial. They believe the world is getting better, that the trajectory of the world is that Christ is putting his enemies under his feet. Psalm 110, 1 through 2, and no, I didn't write that down. I just happen to know this subject, is one of their guiding verses. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. That is, by the way, if you didn't know, if you ask somebody, what's the most quoted or alluded to Old Testament passage in the New Testament? Most people think Isaiah 53. Or Genesis 1. No, it's Psalm 110. Psalm 110 is so important to New Testament theology, it's not even funny. But that's where the postmillennialists are coming from. And then they'll point to 1 Corinthians 15, where it says that Christ must reign until all of his enemies are put under his feet, a reference to Psalm 110, and the last enemy that will be destroyed is death, and that is the resurrection. So they believe that all of Christ's enemies are being put under his feet. Though I would consider myself a liberal Christian, I'm certainly not a fundamentalist. I do consider myself a post-millennial. So, because I don't believe the world is getting worse and worse. I do believe that while there might be valleys, that the trajectory of history is the evolution of, and I know some Christians will find that term dirty, I don't really care, that things are getting better. While it might be 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, it's still a momentum for the better. So no, they don't believe in a rapture theology in which the whole world, it has to go to crap before Jesus can return. That would prohibit the establishment of a Christian nation. That would hinder Christ's return. Like, this is so illogical and ignorant.
Pair these theological beliefs together with capitalism, where one is to accumulate capital, which includes things from the natural world, then Christian nationalists have a perfect recipe for the destruction of the planet.
Yeah, and he goes on about climate change and all of that. No, the two things are incompatible. You can't be both a dominion theologist and rapture pessimistic theology. Like, you just don't know what the hell you're talking about, guy. This is a subject I know, and you don't. And it's obvious. This is just abysmally ignorant.
This is why someone like the Buffalo mass shooter will express Christian nationalist beliefs even though he said he wasn't a Christian. But he is not the only Christian nationalist like this. In fact, many Christian nationalists are just like Donald Trump in that they use generic Christian language but are not overly religious themselves.
So he says the Buffalo shooter espoused Christian nationalist ideas even though he wasn't a Christian himself, and then in the next sentence he calls him a Christian nationalist. Dude, I hate to break this to you, but in order to be a Christian nationalist, you have to be a Christian and a nationalist. That's like calling somebody a Christian nationalist who isn't a nationalist. Like, both of those are kind of essential. But I didn't know too much about the ideology of the Buffalo shooter, so I did some research before the show. I can't find a damn thing in which he is espousing Christian nationalism. He is espousing nationalism, and he did espouse a lot of racist things like the white people are being replaced. They shall not replace us. But that's not inherent to Christian nationalism, though there are some strands of it that are really, really xenophobic. But just because there's an overlap potentially with some of them does not make the two views the same. This is not Christian nationalism. He was just a garden variety racist. Those still exist. Dave, no Christian nationalists, and I know I haven't found one yet. They don't believe in a rapture. There's no rapture in postmillennialism. The rapture, by the way, doesn't exist. It's not in the Bible. Sorry if I'm busting anyone's bubble, but that was like the raving lunacy of a hyper-Pentecostal, funny female prophet or alleged prophet. I can't remember her name. I'd know it again if I heard it, in the 1800s. It's not a biblical theory. They don't believe. Now, they might believe that they will speed up Christ putting his enemies under his feet, and then Christ will return. The second coming is not the same as the rapture. Even people who believe in the rapture say that the second coming is not the same. The debate will be is how much time is there. Are you pre-trib? Are you mid-trib? Are you post-trib? Like, so the whole idea of rapture theology doesn't even fit into this paradigm. It's like asking what the color blue tastes like.
In fact, studies show that the more people hold Christian nationalist beliefs, the less likely they are to attend church, pray, and read the Bible.
At first, when I heard him say this, I was like, yeah, so I believe that most Christian nationalists think that the modern American church is apostate, so of course they're not going to church. But the fact is, he's just talking out his ass. He Googled something or read an article in The Atlantic and didn't go read the original study. Let me pull this up for you, because this is just so sloppy, it's not even funny. So, here's the Atlantic article that he's citing. So, what really happens when Americans stop going to church? And the second sentence, a PRRI survey, and notice it's linked, published earlier this year, showed that only 50% of Christian nationalists and just 42% of those who are sympathizers with the ideology attend church regularly. And it, goes on. It says it means that roughly half of all Christian nationalists rarely, if ever, go to church. Okay, that's correct, but the way it was painted in The Atlantic is wrong. I actually went and read the study. Oh, go figure, to see if it was being represented fairly by The Atlantic or whether there was an agenda. And I don't give a shit whether they're going to church or not. I'm just interested in good critiques. So, here is what is actually said in the PRI study. Christian nationalism adherents are nearly twice as likely as Americans overall to report attending religious services at least a few times a month. Now, we're talking about the same data, but different spins on it. So, the average Christian or professed Christian in America goes to church 28% of the time, and professed Christian nationalists do it 54% of the time. Now, you could spin that as, oh my God, only half of them do. Or you can spin it as they do at twice the rate or nearly twice the rate that the average Christian does. What do you think's a more fair way to spin this? Oh, that was just so bad. Now, I don't remember what clip that was. I think that was clip 11. So I have my notes here by clip. So let's go to clip 12.
So if Christian nationalists are using Christian language and symbols only to advance their political agenda, then Christian nationalism is dangerous in part because it perverts what Jesus was all about. It has nothing to do with following Jesus. It is simply nationalist politics with religious language added to it.
Like you have Marxist politics with Christian language added to it. How are you any different? You say it's bad because you don't agree with the theology, but you have no fundamental problem with mixing religion and politics in that way. You see, I'm consistent. I don't like either of them. You don't mix You don't mix politics and religion that way. You don't use the force of the government to compel your theology. And your problem with Christian nationalism is just you don't agree with their interpretation. But you're perfectly fine with using Christianity in a political sense. Okay, clip 13, which is the last one.
And I'm not saying Christian nationalism isn't Christian. It is distinctly Christian, but I believe Christians can totally get wrong what Jesus was all about. And I'm also not saying Christianity shouldn't be mixed with politics. I think Christianity is inherently political. I just think mixing Christian language and symbols with shitty politics perverts Christianity, and that is dangerous.
See, I agree with you. I do think mixing Christian symbols and language with shitty ideology is dangerous, like liberation theology and Marxist theology. So your own words condemned you. I'm consistent. You don't mix politics and religion and use it to force an ideology upon people with the God said it mantra. So I agree with Mason ultimately, and I know I got a bit heated, but I really bear him no ill will. It's just my style, just like his, is to be very, very humorous. Who's the consistent one here? I don't want to force anyone into any kind of mixing of politics and religion. Christian nationalism is a dangerous ideology. So is Christian Marxism. And both of them should be opposed. And to act holier than thou when you're espousing Christian Marxism is gross in my particular point of view. It's just gross. So I hope this was at least a truthful critique of Christian nationalism. Bad critiques do not serve anyone. Now, to just give you some reasons why I have such a visceral reaction against Christian nationalism, it would have blasphemy laws, people that outwardly undermine their vision of Christianity would be subject to at least civil penalties. They consider themselves magnanimous, and they don't care what you believe in your head. You just can't express it publicly. And you would be encouraged to leave or deported if you persisted. Men and women would be required by law to follow certain separate but equal gender role spheres. And some go so far as Charles Haywood in saying that basically the government can do whatever it wants. Like you could have a dictator would be necessary in the beginning, is what I think he said. Yeah, like dictators in the beginning, like they tend to give up their power. I mean, dictators are really known for that. So we're going to be doing more on this in the future. But I do, the next thing I think I'm going to handle is a commentary on James Lindsay's reliance upon classical liberalism in his critique of Christian nationalists, because I don't agree with him there. It was very rah-rah America. How dare you call yourself an American when you don't support the Constitution and all that? Well, dude, that critique would come against me as well, and that's, you know, I think classical liberalism is just inherently self-contradictory, and we'll deal with that. And I don't have any hostility at all to classical liberals. They certainly are fellow travelers on the libertarian road, but I just don't agree with it. And, you know, we'll talk about that. I thought James Lindsay did a really good job of presenting it in a way that I can highlight the difference. He's a highly articulate speaker. Like, I was so impressed by his show. And also, if you want to know where some people might start to associate some libertarians or libertarian ideas with this crap of Christian nationalism, one thing they're really big on is repealing the right of women to vote. So when you see those edgelords on Twitter saying that dumb shit, they're who's associating you with this kind of crap. The Christian nationalists love that. They lap that up like a thirsty dog. All right, y'all, that is going to be it for this evening, and I hope you have an awesome night. Mi guapas de libertad. Bye-bye.
What you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in a business, not because they want to